Tommy Broughan, 30 seconds to introduce.
Thanks, Lascan. Yeah, well, Minister, I suppose we're a few weeks away from the beginning of triggering of Article 50, and I asked you about this issue in the past. Obviously, the second largest economy, the second largest contributor, net contributor to the EU, will be leaving. It'll obviously have some residual costs and contributions, but has the position become any clearer? I know as a result of the 2015 revision of our GDP stats that we were due to pay an additional maybe 300 million this year. Has the position become any clearer as to our EU contribution?
I'll thank the Deputy for his question. Until it formally withdraws from the European Union, the UK remains a full EU member with all of its existing rights and obligations, including in relation to the EU budget. Brexit will involve complex discussions on the multiannual financial framework, particularly as the UK is an important net contributor to the EU budget. Therefore, Brexit will have a significant impact on EU budget funding and expenditure, and may need to mitigate by either increased contributions from Member States, reductions in the EU funding programmes, or a combination of both. While my department has undertaken some broad modelling work to estimate the potential impact of Brexit on our EU budget calculations, this analysis will need to be developed in more detail in the coming period, when the parameters of the budget negotiations are better defined. In particular, a key point will be getting agreement among the EU 27 on a common approach to the future of the EU budget.
Thanks, Lascan. Well, obviously, Minister, in the Budgetary Oversight Committee at the moment, where we've been discussing with the Governor Central Bank and the Economic Stats Review Group this new concept of GDI star, where an attempt to measure a lot of variables and supplementary analysis in relation to GDP. But given, in fact, what happened in 2015, are we not left in quite a vulnerable situation that we, our basic contribution this year, I think it's heading for £2.5 billion. It's a huge chunk of funding that we must provide. Just to ask if you've done in relation to particularly the variable, the revision of our stats in 2015, if we're looking very deeply at the impacts that will have consistently on this reduced EU budget, given the the exit of the UK.
Our contribution to the EU budget is calculated on our GDP as calculated by Eurostat, and the modifications suggested by the committee under the Governor of the Central Bank to have a more transparent domestic set of numbers which wouldn't have built in the impact of the onshoring of IT, which ran into the GDP figures, wouldn't be taken into account for calculations on the EU budget. Now, the UK is a net contributor, so it's start to reason if they move out that the pool is smaller by the difference between what they get and what they contribute. And then the question is, how is that going to be adjusted? And it's either that everybody pays more, or that the budget is reduced by the pulling back on certain services that are now funded through the European budget. But the other variable then is the amount of compensatory funds up front that the UK will be liable for, and calculations would take that as low as 33 or 4 billion up to over 60 billion. So that will go into the pool as well. So it's impossible to say, except that the issues that you raise in your question are real issues, and they have to be resolved in the course of the negotiation over the next 4 or 5 or 6 years.
Final supplementary.
To get these revised figures, this GNI, and like how will it operate in terms of international standards, where you mentioned Eurostat and obviously IMF and other bodies, given the huge impact that it has on our unique economy? And just the other point, have you taken any position in regard to the long-standing liabilities that the UK will have? We hear about pension, for example, entitlements of European civil servants, of British staff, down to 2050 and so on.
There are estimations generated in Brussels which would be at the higher end of the range, and these are rejected and refuted by the UK authorities. So where it lands, I couldn't even guess at this stage. On the new methodology as advised by that committee on Irish statistics, the intention is not to change the statistical base for our international calculations like the EU budget. The idea is that there will be a set of numbers where statistical aberrations are taken out, so that, like foreign direct investors or the markets or our colleague countries that do trade with us would have a more realistic insight to the reality of the Irish economy, rather than looking at GDP figures that we all agree, while they are real under the calculations required by Eurostat, they don't reflect real economic activity in the country.
We move on now to